morning of Get Up. We had the breaking news right before we came on the air. Adam Schefter reporting, and now the Cowboys have confirmed that they and the Steelers have a trade that will send George Pickens, the mercurial wide receiver, to Dallas in exchange for a third-round draft pick. There are other draft picks swapped in all of this, but that's the headline. George Pickens, so much talent, so many questions in Pittsburgh. Now he goes to Dallas. Let's take this from a bunch of different perspectives. Schrager is here, Lewis, and my former Steeler, Ryan Clark. I said there were so many questions about George Pickens. Does this answer them?
Yeah, it answers a ton of questions about George Pickens. And obviously, I've been around that building. I've been around those guys. George Pickens is an immense talent. I thought he should have been a first-round draft pick if it was strictly based on talent. He fell to the second because of some of these things we've seen arise in the NFL. But this is what Coach Tomlin likes to do. Bro, I was in Pittsburgh with Antonio Brown. And I remember when I was on this show, when I retired, and I said, hey, man, these are some of the things that Antonio does. Antonio is like this. Everybody's like, oh, my God, I've never heard that. You know why? Because Coach Tomlin kept it quiet. Because Coach Tomlin dealt with it. Because Coach Tomlin tolerated. He nurtured him. He tried to keep him as a part of the culture. If Coach Tomlin feels like he can no longer work with you, and you're that talented, then that's a problem. And now when you're going to the Dallas Cowboys and they're trying to create this new culture, how are you going to put him in that locker room and ingratiate him with the rest of those players? And so to me, this is, from a physicality standpoint and a physical standpoint, a home run to get a player like this. But it's a huge question mark when we're talking about the way that he will vibe and the way that he can bring a certain energy to that locker room.
So, Lewis, let's do it from both sides. Starting with the Cowboys, what does this make Dallas in a very, very competitive NFC East?
Well, on paper, it makes them a much more explosive offense, obviously, on paper. But see, we constantly have to try and do this dance, just like NFL front offices and coaching staffs have to do this dance, meaning balancing, getting excited about what would this look like on the football field versus what does it look like away from our view? What does it look like in the meeting room? What does it look like during training sessions in terms of being in the training room? What does it look like when he's supposed to be in the weight room and doing those kinds of things? What's it going to look like as far as his ability to be on time in meetings, not be disruptive? We don't know how all this is. And look, I hear exactly what RC is saying. Look, 2 years ago, we went down to Baltimore when Pittsburgh was getting ready to play Baltimore in the Week 18 game. And we were talking about George Pickens. And you could hear Mike sitting there trying to balance the fact that this is a supremely talented player that obviously pushes me as far as it can push me as far as being able to corral him and keep him within the guardrails, right? In between the white lines, in between the, as far as going out of bounds and doing things that would just be totally disruptive. There comes a point in time when you just go, hey, look, the talent is not good enough at this point for me to continue to tolerate it. Obviously, Dallas is saying, hey, look, man, we didn't get the guy in the draft that we needed. There wasn't someone there that we thought could make a difference or something of that nature. So we have to make a move here. We all know in free agency, you know more about the players that you have when you're talking about veteran player acquisition than you will ever know about the players that you're bringing in. I don't know if Dallas knows what they're getting. I don't know what they're getting. Nobody knows how George is going to react there. But Pittsburgh knows what they got rid of. And that is something that if you're Dallas, you better sit there and go, ding, Well, they're the ones who now have brought it into their building, and they're going to have to deal with it. So let's see what happens.
Schrager, give me the Dallas side.
Desperate times call for desperate measures. They whiffed in the draft. They didn't get that guy. McMillan goes 8 to the Panthers, and they're sitting there at 12. They take an offensive lineman, and they're preaching to everyone. It's about culture. He's our leader. And this, to me, is we went all through March. We went all through April. We didn't get that number 2. CeeDee Lamb got 73 more targets than their number 2 wide receiver a year ago. This is them banking on Dak Prescott being a leader, being able to run that wide receivers room, saying, I got this, we can handle this. And it's them banking on a first-year head coach who's been in the league a long time and hasn't been given an opportunity to be a head coach, being able to say, culture matters, and this guy's going to be able to fit in our culture. I will add this, though. First-year head coach, Jerry after a loss, what happens with the media, and if things don't go his way and he doesn't get the targets, this is going to be the ultimate test for Dak Prescott, how he can handle this, and we're going to see if he really is a $60 million man.
So potentially combustible Cowboys. On the other side, the specter of Aaron Rodgers, what are the Pittsburgh
If I'm Aaron Rodgers, I'm not going to Pittsburgh.
That's what Danny said, too.
What does that mean? What does now the attractive part about Pittsburgh was having George Pickens, was having DK Metcalf, two dudes that have these very different skill sets, but they're both also dynamic and explosive. And now you have Pat Freiermuth. You go out in the draft and you get a big bruising back from Iowa, but in the offseason you get Kenneth Gainwell as well. So you had all of these pieces to be excited about, but the most exciting two pieces was the fact that you had two absolute monsters, although crash outs, on the outside. And now you no longer have that. And so if I'm Aaron Rodgers, who knows my skills are diminished, who knows that my time is coming to an end, why would I go a place that seemingly is not building a roster to compete for a championship just to play? Aaron Rodgers just did that last year. And so to me, this isn't a team that's ready to compete, which I'm fine with, because I felt like you didn't make the decision to get a quarterback in the draft. Maybe your evaluation was that none of them were good enough and then Aaron Rodgers is better. But if you're going to suck all the way. Let's go get Arch. Or let's go get Nussmeier.
Just got another third round.
Yeah, let's go get somebody that can really go. But don't add more to this team and trying to get Aaron Rodgers and be mediocre enough to not pick high.
Lewis, what are the Pittsburgh Steelers?
They're a run-of-the-mill team. They are in the very definition of purgatory right now. It just is what it is. They're never gonna look. I hear what you're saying, RC, but you know this. Pittsburgh's never gonna suck. That's not in their DNA. They're just not. But they're, as they're presently constructed, unless there's something I can't foresee, I just don't know how they are able to really, punch through and get back into the upper echelon in the AFC. There's some fine players on that roster right there,
yes.
Okay? There really are. The guys who you just put up on the screen, there's some good players, but we know that this just isn't a paper game. This just isn't a, fantasy football type of game where we move player X out and put player Y in. And quite honestly, at the most important position in particular, they're just not good enough, man. They're just not. And I know they're going to be Ohio State fans going, Will Howard won a national title. Will Howard led Ohio State to the pro. Look, Will Howard is a good college quarterback. There's no question about that. There's a reason why Will Howard went where he went to, man. There really is. And it doesn't have anything to do with how people like him.
Yeah.
It's not about his character. It's not about any kind of baggage. It's about what they see on the football field and how it translates. Pittsburgh's in a tough spot, dude. They're in a tough spot.
Final word.
And we wait for Rodgers. I still think they want Rodgers. I don't think they're moving off of Rodgers. I think that Mason Rudolph is there now, but they are in the waiting game for Aaron Rodgers to tell us in January or February that we'd be in a situation in May that they now are without George Pickens, without Najee Harris. They're completely unknown at quarterback, and the Steelers fans just say, we got it. Hang tight. I think that's asking a lot.
I thought you meant that he'll let them know in January when he's got.
He might.
There's nothing, right?
We have nothing.
There's nothing.
We have nothing, and we can assume all we want that he has a handshake deal and that we know this, we know that. I am telling you, he shows up to the Kentucky Derby, and people in Pittsburgh were unaware whether he was going to announce it there. He didn't.
You're right. You know who's a Steeler fan? Stephen A. Smith. First Take is enormous story this morning. Adam Schefter reported it. Now the Cowboys have announced it. They've agreed to terms to acquire wide receiver George Pickens from the Steelers in exchange for a third-round pick. There are other pick swaps involved, but the part you're really interested in is the third-round pick, and candidly, the part you're really interested in is George Pickens, the mercurial but extraordinarily talented wide receiver, leaving Pittsburgh, going to Dallas. We've been on it all morning long, back and forth between the basketball and football. RC just jumped into a car to get here as quickly as he could, and we appreciate that so much. So let's just get quick, blush, immediate reaction. What?
That Mike Tomlin consistently says he doesn't run from coaching. He doesn't run from teaching. He doesn't run from grooming. And so if George Pickens, with that immense amount of talent, can no longer exist in that locker room, it's going to be difficult for him to exist anywhere. And we're looking at a Jerry Jones who doesn't make moves very often in the offseason, now saying at this price, I have to make this move if I want to make my team better. And so to me, it's